Welcome to the Fund2000.com Real Estate Podcast. My name is Chuck Ham, and today we're going to talk about the numbers game. What are some of the real estate data that your real estate professionals, agents, mortgage lenders, etc. should be crunching for you? What are some of those numbers that are important for you making an informed decision as a buyer or a seller? Welcome. Thanks for coming to the Fund2000.com Real Estate Podcast. There's a lot of data out there that you ought to be getting when you are considering entering a real estate transaction, because the real estate transaction for most people is one of the most important, most valuable, and biggest transactions of your life. And you only have a couple of them, and you don't really get to go back and change things after you make decisions. You don't really get to modify your agreements. You don't really get to modify decisions and things once it's all done. Once it's done, it's done. So the role of a real estate professional, an agent or a broker, is to help their clients make informed decisions. And in today's world of technology and computers and data, information, it's available. There's really no excuse for you to not be making an extremely informed decision, knowing what the numbers are and knowing what your break-even point is, or how much you're going to net, or how much you can afford, or whether you should even buy or sell at this time. There's really no excuse to not have all that information to make a decision. I remember growing up and getting started in the real estate business. There were so many unknowns. Technology was started, but it wasn't as developed as it is today. Now we have calculators, we have forecasting tools, we have just all the data immediately available to us to help you make decisions. And I don't think real estate agents have really caught up with the technology that's out there and available to you. As a principal and broker in our real estate sales and mortgage business, I know that we've gone to great lengths to be able to offer our clients more data up front. We don't even charge our clients for all the data and work that we do up front. And part of that is because it's readily available. You could do it yourself, though you might not know how to do it. We know how to do it. And we also have it all available in just one or two platforms versus people, most clients, most people in the public have to really research and figure out where these resources are available and learn. Sometimes there's quite a bit of a learning curve, and we're trained on these kind of things. So some of the things we're going to go over today for buyers is exploring loan options. What kind of loan should you get, and how do you make a decision? You have different down payment options. You have different interest rate options. You have different loan programs based on what kind of a buyer, what kind of a background you have as a buyer. Maybe you're a military, a veteran. Maybe you have a career that gives you special funding options for a down payment assistance programs. Maybe you have plenty of cash or equity in a home to make a sizable down payment. These are all things that we look at if you're a buyer and sometimes a seller too. And we take that into the loan pre-approval process. Now, the loan pre-approval process is something that we've talked about before on this show. The loan pre-approval process is where we figure out what your payments are going to be given a specific scenario. If you can afford it, if you think you can afford it, you look at the numbers and make a decision yourself. If the lender thinks you can afford it, the lender has to make a good faith decision. That's our office, to know that you have the ability to repay the loan. And we compare the numbers to the guidelines to see if your payments are going to be below whatever the maximum guidelines are. So that's the affordability piece, whether you can afford to make the payment. And then what is the required cash that you're going to need to close on this loan? You have down payment, you have closing costs, and other upfront costs of the transaction, such as inspections and appraisals. So the loan pre-approval process is a calculation that we do, or a series of calculations that we do to help you as a buyer know those things. If you don't get those specific details on a one-page document or maybe a three-page document, depending on, usually it's all on the first page, even if it is a multi-page document. The most important information on what we call a loan estimate is all on the first, maybe 1 or 2 pages, and that gives you what your interest rate's going to be, what your payment amount is going to be, what the required cash to close is. So these are things we've talked about before on the show, so I'm not going to go too much further into it, except for maybe I'll say we want a complete loan application to be able to figure this out. And we want to get the application all the way to what we call a direct underwriting approval. So that means we want to run your credit, we want to look at your income documentation, we want to get all the information that goes on a mortgage application known as a 1003 and get direct underwriting approval, because that means you've already gone through the automated underwriting systems or any kind of underwriting system that the lenders use. And we as a broker are working directly with these lenders to get you this direct underwriting approval. We're basically your representative to these mortgage lenders. They're the ones that have the money. We have access to their systems. We go in and get you the direct underwriting approval, which is the best kind of approval you can get. And it carries a lot of weight because it has gone through rigorous calculations and vetting at an early stage in the process. And sellers recognize that, listing agents recognize that. So that's the loan pre-approval process. You ought to be getting all that information up front. And if you're not, then you need to change lenders. You need to change mortgage broker. These are things that our office offers. If you're a renter and you're considering buying a property, then you have a real specific question. Does it make more sense for me to continue renting at this cheaper rent that I currently have? Maybe you have expensive rent, I don't know. Or is it cheaper for you to buy? And yeah, that's a complex calculation, because you have rent, which is, if you're already in a rental agreement, you don't have to pay interest. There's a lot of differences in the kind of transaction, between renting and buying. So we have a calculator, and this is the cool part of this show today. We've got a few different calculators that we can use, and I don't know a whole lot of agents that are offering this to their clients. We do offer this to our clients, and that is the rent versus buy calculation. If you are a renter, or if you're considering continuing or getting yourself into a rental agreement, but you also have the question of whether you might want to buy before you get into this new lease extension or new rental agreement, then we run these numbers for you, and it's pretty cool. So I'm going to pull it up right now, and I use a tablet, and so I'm looking at my tablet right now as I'm on this podcast recording, and we're going to go to the rent versus buy calculator. And the first thing I would ask my client is, how much do you pay in rent? And I'm going to try to use round numbers, but numbers that make sense to some buyers. I'm not going to cover everybody right now, but the basic idea is that the more money you're paying in rent, or more money you prospectively would be paying in rent, probably the more likely you're going to want to buy. It would also be true that the lower home prices are, and the lower the interest rates are for a loan in relation to rent, the more likely you're going to want to buy. But so we can run a couple of different scenarios right now. Let's take $2,500 rent, which is super cheap rent for almost anywhere around where I'm doing business. In Oxnard, you probably can find some 2 and 3 bedroom units for less than $2,500. In Moore Park, where I live, you can't find anything, I don't think, for under $2,500, especially 3 bedrooms. But let's say you're paying right now $2,500 in rent, or you can find something that's $2,500 per month in rent, and a home that you'd be looking at buying in the area or wherever, let's say it costs an average, lower than average, $600,000. Let's say it's a small little house, maybe a fixer-upper, and $600,000. And let's use a down payment amount for an FHA loan, which is a 3.5% down payment. And I'm going to click done on my calculator, and it's going to make some assumptions about the transaction. For example, what interest rate and whatnot. So the assumptions are a 7.625 interest rate, and that's just coming, that the calculator is doing that for me. I'm not basing that on any actual figures right now, but I do know that 7.625 isn't that far off. I was just doing some approvals over the weekend for my clients, and they're around there. I can probably still get under 7% for some of my clients. So the question here is, when do I break even? So the rent versus buy calculator is telling the prospective renter buyer at what point do they break even on having purchased a property versus having rented all that time. That's the question we're answering. So when do you break even? How long does it take for you to break even? If it makes more sense to buy a home right now, then you'll break even pretty quickly. If it makes more sense to rent, then you're probably not going to break even for quite a while. So if I'm paying rent $2,500 per month, but my alternative is to buy a home at $600,000 at today's interest rates, and I'm making a 3.5% down payment, assuming property taxes of 1.2%, that's kind of high, and having to pay hazard insurance, I won't break even for a total of 7 years approximately. So it's going to take me 7 years before I can break even on having purchased that property. In other words, I will save money. I will have spent less money renting at $2,500 per month for all those 7 years. Once I hit 7 years, then I will start wishing that I had purchased the property, that, you know, the $600,000 house. Well, let's change interest rates on that figure. Let's say interest rates go down 1%. So instead, interest rates are now 6.625, and everything else remains the same. I'm going to compute this, and then my break-even point is in 5 years and 1 month. So 1 percentage point dropped my break-even point by 2 years. Let's say my rent is actually $3,500. I know a lot of people paying around $3,500 in rent, but these people probably would rather buy a home for around $800,000, even though that's super cheap for these homes. And let's just go ahead and use the FHA loan scenario. And let's go back to our 7.6% interest rate. So current rent, $3,500, home price, $800, 3.5% down payment, interest rate at 7.625, all the regular assumptions about hazard insurance and property taxes. How long does it take to break even? 6 years and 5 months. So your buying costs in this scenario are $288,000, and over 6 years and 5 months, you will spend that same amount of money in rent, $288,000 approximately. And then at 6 years and 5 months, then you start to break even, and you start wishing, oh, I guess maybe I should have purchased, if you're still in that same scenario. So this is a really cool calculator, and we can run this as many times as you would like, with whatever scenario you would like. So it's a good reason to stay in touch with our office. We can tell you if the scenario makes sense if you're considering renting or buying. I just changed the interest rate. Let's say the interest rates go back down to, let's say, 4.625. Let's say you're paying $3,500 in rent, home price is $800,000, down payment 3.5%. It would take 2 years and 5 months to break even. So if our interest rates were even higher than they were just a couple years ago, or 2022, beginning of 2022, they were lower than 4%, then you would be breaking even in only 2 years. So it's really interesting. And try a different calculator now. So I'm going to go look at my outline here and see what's next. That was the rent versus buy calculation. Next, we have the buy down calculator. First, what is a buy down? This is more on the mortgage side. Now that we have higher interest rates, we're looking at buy downs more. In fact, the majority of my clients that have closed this year and that are getting pre-approved for loans this year, every single one of them, if not maybe the majority of them, if not all of them, have looked at the cost of buying down the interest rate. And what that is you pay money up front to get a lower interest rate. So if the par note rate that all the lenders are offering is 7.625, then you can pay extra money to the lender and get your interest rate down to a certain amount. So if you pay 1 point, let's say, that's called a discount point. And so a discount point is 1 percentage point of the loan amount. Let's say your loan amount is going to be $500,000, then the discount point is $5,000. That's 1 percentage point of the loan amount. Now, the amount that discount point buys down the interest rate, that varies, and the lender determines that. So we get an upfront quote. Every time we run a mortgage scenario, we calculate how much of a discount your money can buy. So it'll vary from one day to the next, but once we have a loan commitment from the lender, once we lock in your rates, that is locked. So you want to get, if you like your scenario in this volatile interest rate market right now, if you like your scenario and you need to lock it in so that so that the fluctuations in the market don't hurt you, then you need to get that locked in. That's an in-writing commitment from the lender to you, stating that you will be guaranteed that rate, even including that discount that you're offering to pay at closing. An interest rate buy down is the use of upfront money to get a lower interest rate. There are different kinds of buy downs. You can have a permanent buy down, which is pretty much the only thing I discuss with my clients, but we can also give you a 2-1 buy down, which gives you a temporary buy down. You pay some money up front so that you can temporarily, over a period of a couple years, have a lower interest rate and therefore a lower payment. 2-1 buy downs, there's 3-2-1. I'm not going to get into what those are right now. I think the most important one right now is the permanent buy down. So let's look at a calculation or two with permanent buy downs. Let's say that you're considering purchasing a property that is $800,000, and we're going to use a permanent buy down. Let's say that your loan amount is let's say your down payment is 3.5% because it's an FHA, and that seems high for a lot of people in the world, a lot of people in the country. $800,000 is allowed around here and in our area for FHA loans. Let's say the note rate is 7.625, so your payments are going to be based on a 7.625 interest rate unless you buy it down. So we're going to buy it down. Let's come up with, let's say we're going to do 5 discount points. So 5 discount points, that is, you take the loan amount and then you take 5% of that, and that gives you a new interest rate. Could give you a new interest rate. Now this is going to vary from lender to lender, but this is a really accurate, a fairly accurate, reasonably accurate estimate of how much you'll be able to buy down the interest rate. So if you were to do 5 discount points, you would take your interest rate of 7.625 down to 6.375%. And that would require $38,600 up front so that you can reduce your payment by, reduce your payment by $648 per month. Instead of paying $7,046 per month at 7.625%, you will pay $6,398 at 6.375%. That's a $648 $1 per month savings. Annually, that would save you almost $8,000. And there's a benefit for sellers to look at this information too, because sellers can contribute through seller credits to the buyer's permanent buy down. By offering a seller's contribution of $38,000, maybe just to use a round number of $40,000 to buy down the buyer's interest rate, the seller can gain more buyers that can qualify, because there are more buyers that will have the ability to pay $6,400 per month versus $7,000 per month. And that's the theory there. So sellers look at this information because they say, I'll get more buyers if I offer this money, and that might help me keep my list price a little bit higher, because who knows what kind of buyer I'm actually going to get. I'll get more offers and be able to leverage these offers and figure out the way for me to get the best, figure out how I can get the best offer, highest and best offer. Let's change the calculation a little bit. Let's say the house is $1 million, and we're doing a conventional 20% down. We have a 20% down payment. All right, $1 million, 20% down payment, 7.625% is today's rates, and we want to do, instead of 5 discount points, let's say we only want to do 3 discount points. So with 3 discount points on a conventional loan, 20% down payment, that's how you get a conventional loan. That will take your interest rate from 7.625 down to 6.875, and under the par note rate, the 7.625, without the buy down, in other words, your payment would be just a hair under $7,000. If you were to pay 3 discount points, if somebody were to pay 3 discount points, remember the seller can pay that, then that would bring down your monthly payment to just a little bit over $6,500. So your monthly savings is just over $400 per month, and your annual savings is $4,800 per month. That's pretty cool. That these are things that we can figure out for you. We can run these scenarios to figure out if you should buy down your interest rate. Now, we can also figure out at what point do you break even on that buy down, and the way you do that is just you look at the total amount of money that you just paid for your buy down, and in this case it was $24,000. It was a loan amount of $800,000 and 3 discount points, so that's $24,000. How long does it take you to get that money back? Well, if you're saving just under $5,000 per year, then it's going to take you around 5 years to get that money back. So the question is do you think you're going to be in that loan scenario, in that house, for 5 years or more? And if the answer is yes, then you should have done the buy down. If the answer is no, then maybe interest rates came down, or you think interest rates are coming down, then maybe you don't need to do such a high buy down. These are things that we can discuss. This is really good information. It's helpful. It at least gives you data, information that you can use to make good decisions. So let me go back to my outline, see what kind of calculator we want to look at next. The cost comparison, buy now versus later. This is cool. Buy now versus later is a calculation that we do to see if what would it have. This is to convince those buyers that have been holding on for some time. And the theory is that home prices go up. Now we know that interest rates are also going up quite a bit, and the appreciation of a home and the cost of owning a home continue to go up, and therefore it would have been good for a lot of buyers to have purchased a long time ago, and therefore it's probably a good idea for you to buy now. So let's just run a scenario. Let me go jump ahead here. So buy now versus later. Let's say that the home price, $1 million. Let's say you have a 20% down payment and interest rates are 7.625. I'm going to compute. So with a loan amount of $800,000 and interest rate of 7.625, your total payment would be $6,964, and your cash to close would be $224,000. That includes your down payment and your closing costs. Now we can do what will happen in 2 years, or the later component of this calculation. So let's say in 2 years, based on historical data, the future value of your $1 million home is going to be $1 million, $1,071,000. So using an appreciation rate of 3.5%, we can change the appreciation rate. So if we think that it's going to be 5% instead, then $1,100,000 over 2 years. We can change also how many years we want to look ahead. Let's say we want to look ahead at 5 years. So let's say we're appreciating at 5% per year, and we're looking at 5 years ahead. The $1 million house that we bought today would be worth 1.276, and that gives you appreciation of $276,000. So that is pretty good. Well, I also have home price projections for the next 12 months on this calculator. So the Mortgage Brokers Association says over the next 12 months they don't think there's going to be any appreciation. Fannie Mae is predicting 3.9% appreciation. CoreLogic, they have a ton of data, so all these are reliable. 4.5% is what they're predicting. Zillow, I think they tend to go kind of aggressive. They have a business model they're trying to sell to their investors. 6.5% is what they're predicting the appreciation to be over the next 12 months. So this is a cool calculator. You can figure out what your home's going to be worth in any particular amount of time. We have a lot of similar kind of data, but this is for sellers. What kind of information do sellers need in order to make informed decisions on selling? Well, at the break, we'll look at that. So home sellers need also to make really informed decisions. A lot of times home sellers are also buyers, so I would refer the home sellers to the same information we just reviewed above just now. But there's also some other specific information to sellers that's not applicable to buyers, so I've separated it out for home sellers. A few things here. The comparative market analysis, what is that? That is what your property is worth. What is the property, how much time is it going to take for the property to sell? What is a likely price that it's going to sell for? And usually we're using comparable sold data. So we look at comparable properties that have sold in the last, 6 months, if it's available. If it's not available, in the past 12 months. But usually in this market where we've had a lot of transactions over the past, let's say a year or two, there's less transactions now, but there's still enough to get a lot of good comparable sold data. We look at the properties that are the most comparable to the subject property, your property in other words, and we see what they sold for. And then we look at other factors like what is the current market doing in relation to when that last comparable sold property sold. A lot of times the most comparable sold property sold 6 months ago or maybe 4 months ago, and there could be significant market changes in that period of time, maybe because of interest rates, maybe because of a lot of new properties coming on the market. So a broker and good real estate professional is going to offer their seller client, a comparative market analysis that takes into account all of these things and gives you a real accurate number of what your home or your property is most likely to sell for, how long on average it should take to sell. And then that gives you a number to then base your other information on. So for example, you want to know how much money you're going to make on the sale of your property. So the comparative market analysis is where we start. That is the most important thing to figure out everything that comes next. It also helps you understand if you should even bother, because maybe you owe more money on your property than what it's going to sell for. That we haven't seen that for a while, but there are some scenarios that are kind of sticking out to me a little bit. People who have purchased in the past couple years, fairly recently, that need to sell, and interest rates have risen since that time. And that is creating the situation where we might have negative equity in some properties. So it's something to keep an eye out for, but you probably, if that's you, you probably need that information more than anybody, and you need to get it from somebody who's reliable, like our office. We're happy to help you if that's your situation. If you have no equity in your home, we can still help you, and we'll tell you how. Once we have a value for your property that you're selling, then we can start figuring out the cost of the transaction. And the calculation that we do at that point is what the seller net sheet. So we take the value of your property, and the value is going to determine some of the costs of the transaction. For example, title insurance, that is based on the value of the property that's being sold. Or actually it's based on, there's a couple different aspects to title insurance. There's the buyer's title policy, and then there's a seller's title policy. Real estate commissions are usually based on the value of the property, unless you have some kind of a flat fee negotiated, which is possible. We do many types of agreements with our clients, so it's possible that you have a flat fee. Usually it's a percentage. Most transactions have a total real estate commission of about 5%, and the buyer agent and the seller agent, listing agent, are going to split that, usually 2.5. And that's usually the bulk of the cost of the transaction. You'll have escrow fees, you'll have some other smaller fees, but real estate commissions, title, and escrow, those are the big ones. And once we have the value of your property, then we calculate what those other costs, real estate commissions, title, and escrow, and a few other things. And then we come up with what you will net as a seller. How much do you take home after all the costs of the transaction? It's super important for you to understand what you're going to take home. You want to know, one, is this agent offering you a reasonable assessment of the value of your property and a reasonable assessment of what the costs are, or is this agent actually overcharging you on commissions? That's where you'll get to know this too, because they're going to tell you what their office is going to charge for real estate commissions. And this is also where you start negotiating those items. You want this information early. You don't want to just take it for granted. You want to figure out these costs and make sure that you're happy with what the commission and the estimated costs and value, all those things. You want to make sure you're satisfied with that information before you sell. So that's the net sheet, seller's net sheet piece of what a real estate professional should be offering you. You need that information. There is no proceeding with any real estate professional without getting a net sheet, without knowing how much you're going to take home and having that agreement hashed out and getting good, accurate numbers, and also being able to feel satisfied that you're not overpaying for the commissions and the other costs of the transaction. We also use the buy now or later, or sell now versus later, and we can look at then versus now as well if you want to look at that. But it's interesting to use those calculations when you're a seller too, because you can see, what we can make certain assumptions about what the market is doing today and what it's going to do in the future, and whether it makes more sense for you to sell today versus later, and also what the numbers would have been if you would have done it at a certain period of time in the past versus today. And once again, sellers also benefit from the calculators that buyers use. So we look at, in fact, I recommend that sellers step in the shoes of buyers to see how they're going to view the subject property that's being sold, what their likely payment is going to be, whether it's going to make sense for them to buy down the interest rate, whether you as a seller should offer a buy down amount or a credit for the buyer to use, and that might make your selling your home a little bit easier, because you'll attract more buyers, because more buyers will be able to qualify if you have a higher, especially if you have a higher priced home. We obviously can't predict market, we can't predict interest rates, we can't predict values, but we can use past data and decide if certain projections are reasonable for the future. we can usually assume that what's been happening today is going to continue happening. Real estate's a pretty steady market, so we can usually make good forecasts and good predictions about what the values of your property or what the interest rates are going to be in the reasonably near future. What we can't predict are, you know, market events, crashes. We don't know when those things are going to happen, and if we could predict those, and we'd all, you know, we'd all want to know that information. We could get rich off of that information, but that information is not available to us. So what we try to just go with what the data usually is, and then we try to hedge against disaster. We try to have equity in our home, have savings, reserves, and that kind of thing. That's a little summary of what real estate professionals should be offering buyers and sellers. And there's probably quite a few other things actually, but those are, I think, some of the most important bits of data that should be offered by a real estate professional and that you should be demanding. If you have any questions about pre-approvals, about calculations, about any of the calculators we use today, feel free to let me know. The best way to reach me here is chuck@fund2000.com. Thanks for listening.